Guys, we actually did it. I made it out of the comment section onto your screen. If you're not familiar with me, I'm Social Sophie, and we are here today with Kim Clijsters, legend and Hall of Famer. And she's here to what, Kim? Answer all of my terrible questions?
I wouldn't say it that way. I would say like maybe be like a nice like soundboard or something, like just to chat and to answer the questions that you have about tennis that you maybe don't want to ask Andy or feel a little bit shy about or scared even. Just a nice women's conversation about tennis.
Yeah, sometimes I ask Andy a question and like I said, I just don't like his answer. And so you've been wonderful enough.
I sometimes have to hold back too by like drawing him into some more like women's issues, right? That we deal with on tour and stuff. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to bother him with that. I don't need his opinion about that. So it's nice to talk to you about it.
So we've taken it out of his home gym and we're here to talk about a few more women's issues. And you're perfectly qualified to do that. And I am wearing a sweater with tennis balls on it. So I am obviously qualified to do it as well. How are you? You've just got back from Dallas, is that right?
I got back a few days ago, but I feel like yesterday was about the first day where I felt like I was able to move normally again after playing Martina Hingis on Saturday night in Dallas. It's a men's tournament. I mean, the facility, the whole organization is done so well. They set up the courts in the indoor facility of the Dallas Cowboys, which was beautifully set up. Like the court color was beautiful. Like they used the colors of the Cowboys, the blue with the silver or the gray. Very convenient for players too. Like the hotel is right next to the site, which makes it easy. Like there's literally a tunnel that you can take from the hotel lobby to the tennis courts. Like it was very, very convenient. So I hope this tournament can keep growing, and because it's definitely a great event for the players too.
That's so exciting. And you were there to play tennis, but I heard a story that maybe you were throwing some footballs around, kicking some footballs around.
Well, we got asked to go to the outdoor turf field, and I grew up, from a soccer family. Like my dad played soccer growing up, I played soccer growing up, but because of my dad, like he played World Cups for the Belgium national team and everything. So I've kicked the soccer ball around, but then all of a sudden, Martina and we were out there and they asked us to kick a football. And they put it, I don't really know what it's called. They used this little metal triangle thing to hold the ball in place. And then they just told us to kick it. So Martina kicked it first, and it kind of like stumbled ahead a little bit. And then it was my turn. I was like, all right, well, it's I know how to kick a soccer ball, and I just asked, like, do I hit it with the tip? Do I kick it with the tip of my shoe or with the top of my foot? And so they told me, okay, the top of your foot, go for it. And I kicked it, and I was in shock. Like I kicked it dead center, like nice and high, like it shot out. Like, a few people came out of the restaurant. They were like, holy shit, like, how did you do that? And I was like, I don't know. I just kicked it, like
straight through the field goal.
Straight through the field goal. Nice.
Insane.
And like it went, I was very proud. And my dad passed away. So I was like, thanks, Dad. Like, you taught me this. So, a good moment to do that right there. But no, it was, the whole experience there was really nice. Like I took my 8-year-old Blake with me, and we just, had some time like to, just to have one kid with you. Sometimes it's nice as well. Yeah. And he's really into tennis all of a sudden. He got to meet Ben Shelton and Taylor Fritz, and John Isner was there. Like, he's watched tennis with me on TV, but just to see the guys in real life, and he still talks about it.
It's a whole different. I can even relate in a way. Like you watch tennis on screen and hear Andy talk about it, and then you go and actually see it in person, and you're like, oh my gosh, the whole culture of this is so cool. The energy of it is so great.
And for us, like we're so used to it, right? To be in that routine. I have to admit, like I'm so out of it now, like being a professional tennis player, that when I go to these events, like I don't want to be in the way of anybody. Like I don't, like you feel a little bit out of place at the same time.
You're not like legend coming through.
No, but it's weird. It's like you feel a bit out of place, but it also feels like home still.
Yeah,
it's like a weird kind of balance. But it was really nice. And to watch the best male tennis players in the world compete there was obviously great and awesome. Yeah.
And you played a few matches. You played with
I
Taylor
played one
Fritz?
match. Oh yeah, no, we did an event. Taylor Fritz and I, we kicked off. They called it like the christening of the court. We kicked it off, and we hit I mean, it was literally like a 2-minute hit. And then yeah, Martina and I, we played a singles match together. It ended up being super tiebreak in the third set, and it was very close. I think it was like 10-8 or something in the super tiebreak. So
So it
my
wasn't the
left
full
leg.
three-setter.
It wasn't a full. No, it wasn't. So
Okay, some closure for the listeners.
Somewhere the communication got to me wrong, but I was very pleasantly surprised to hear when the chair umpire told me during the coin toss, no, it's a super tiebreak in the third set. So I was like, okay, that's a bonus.
So you did, I know everyone's sort of been talking about the balls in Dallas this year. I mean, not exclusive to Dallas at all, of course, but how did you feel playing with them for the, for that 1 3-set match?
I mean, during the match, we change the balls every, 7 or 9 games. So you don't really notice it that much, I feel. But in the warm up, I think Martina and I, we had a little bit of a practice session about 40 minutes, 45 minutes into, and you could really like start noting the difference. And this is going to sound probably a little bit weird, but the balls, like, they became very fluffy and hairy. Like, can't say it in any other way.
Yeah.
I guess that's a term we use. But yeah, it was very rough. Like the courts, you can, it's like rough sandpaper, like it's very, like, I love moving on it. Like you have a good grip on it. You can push off easily because there's like very well, like there's a good grid on the court. But it obviously, wears down the tennis balls a lot faster.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think something people expect in Indian Wells, I think, is maybe where they were talking about it so much last year with like actual sand kind of on the court, but maybe not in Dallas so much. Like, do you say that it was kind of that same sandpaper texture?
Yeah, I think they add some stuff to the paint, right? When they paint the court, and that's what makes either the court a little bit slower or a little bit faster. I'm definitely not the player that knows all the the details very well, right? I remember back in the day when I was playing and I had to do a press conference and they would say, so we heard from Roger Federer that the court is playing faster and that the balls this week are a little bit lighter than they were, last week. And I was like, okay, like if Roger says so, like I'm sure he knows, like he would feel way better than I do. So yeah, I never really tried, like I never really worried about it, or it is what it is. Like you just deal with it, and but I feel like the ball issue. I remember being on tour, like starting on tour, and it was a problem back in the day, like late 1990s, like early 2000s. Like that was already an issue. So it's a reoccurring issue, and I don't feel like much has changed over time at all. So. Yeah, I don't know if there's really anything that we as a player could do about it, unless the organizations and but there's so many companies that sponsor different tournaments, and unless the tour or the ITF, the WTA tour, ATP tour starts like putting their foot down for the to do what's best for the players, I don't think there's anything we can do, because it's, like I said, it's something that I've been hearing for the last 25 years is the different balls that are being used all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, there's more and more players speaking out about it every year. And like you said, I mean, it's I obviously wouldn't know what the solution would be, just like a total overhaul. Some people talk about using one ball for every tournament, but like there's so many different surfaces. I can't see how that would be beneficial.
Yeah, different surfaces, different sponsors. I mean, tournaments have their own sponsor. Like it's which, there's I don't know. Like, I don't know how you could, I'm sure. I don't know. Have you ever talked, like, what is Andy's opinion about it? Have you ever mentioned anything to him about it? Or, because he's usually like pretty, he comes up with really good ideas. Like,
yeah, he talked about it last year during Indian Wells. I really can't remember. I took a picture of one of the fuzzy, what'd you say, fluffy and hairy tennis balls, and put it next to a picture of him with like fluffy and hairy hair coming out of a visor. And so that's
don't you have a picture of Sabalenka? Didn't she just post something
about?
Yeah,
she did. She posted. Let's see. Let me grab it. And she said, so if you guys can see it, it's a new, you maybe can't see it as well, but it's a new ball. And then 25 minutes later, it's almost like doubled in size.
But that's in practice, right? But then if you go, I mean, usually 7 to 9 games will be about 25, 30 minutes or so. So that's about the time in a match when they turn kind of in that direction that they would change it. But there's a big difference, obviously, when you go from that type of ball to then change it to new ball. So you constantly have to adjust your shot a little bit as well, right? If you go from like a really like fuzzy, fluffy ball to all of a sudden, a brand new out of the can ball that's been under pressure the whole time, and then it does change, and it makes a big impact the way it leaves your racket, and so it's definitely not easy for players to constantly be adjusting to, and it could be a lot easier and better for them, and I think for the sport too, if it would be like one ball, but I don't see a solution.
Are you guys used to making that adjustment in practice, or do you feel like once you get to tournaments, it's kind of like a whole new thing?
No, but that's the thing. Like, there's so many things to think about, right? It's not just the ball. It's the humidity. It's the wind if you're playing outside. Is like there's so many things that you have to think about. It's the racket tension. Like, we used to play with natural gut, which was very sensitive to changes in weather, temperature. So you constantly had to adjust like your racket tension, but then also like if the balls felt different, you had to kind of like, adjust your strings to, the ball's a little bit lighter. Let me up my strings a little bit, like the tension on my strings. So I always had a few rackets in my bag that had a different tension, because also if my opponent was hitting the ball a little bit flatter or harder, I would go to a little bit of a tighter tension. And so just to adjust and kind of learn to read and feel out there. But the thing is, in men's tennis, you have a little bit more time to adjust, right? Like in women's tennis, it's we play, maximum 3 sets, and a lot of times, like by the time that you're really adjusted, that first set can already be over. And so it takes time. It takes time, and but you learn as you get older and more experienced. You obviously learn.
Speaking of pro women's tennis, I did want to ask you a question. This is a question that I did bring to Andy one time, and I thought I was in a safe space. And it turns out I was actually in an incredibly dangerous space. And I did not like his answer, but we were all at dinner one night, and I asked, I didn't ask, I told, if we're being honest, I said, I just feel like if I gave my life to this sport, if I trained every single day, dedicated all that I have, I know you know where it's going.
Yeah.
In a year, I feel like I could be on the pro tour. And I want you to tell me why I'm right.
I wish you filmed Andy's reaction.
Yeah, it was Andy. It was his kids. Like everyone was piling on. It was a bloodbath.
That would be impossible to say the least.
She's trying to figure out the nicest way to say,
you're
an insane person.
I'm actually thinking back on a moment where my husband, who was, my boyfriend at the time, and I think back in the day, like when we started dating, Roger was obviously, a very, leader. Like he was a dominant force on the tour, and he would be up close. Like we would see him practice, and we would go, to watch his matches. And I remember at one point, my husband, who was my boyfriend, goes, do you think if I, for something similar, like I don't exactly if it was like a year or for 4 years, if I practiced for 4 hours a day, do you think I could hit the ball like Roger Federer? And I looked at it and I was like, is he joking, or is he like, is he actually for real? Or, the only answer I have to that is players make it look so easy, right? Like they make it look so easy and effortless. But the question or the answer to your question is no, you would not be able to do that. Sorry, I can't give you any other answer than
I can handle it. Yeah. I thought maybe Andy just didn't want to lose me as social media coordinator.
Yeah, no, we've all been playing for so long. And I mean, tennis is a sport that you have to play from such a young age. because there's so many things to think about, right? So when we get to the stage where we're at the pro level, we don't need to think about a lot of the things anymore that you would have to think about when you would start, right? Like those things are so natural to us. We don't even need to think about it anymore. We think about a lot of the details, like the small details at that level, and that make a big difference. But yeah, it's funny. And I guess it's a compliment to the pros to make a sport look so effortless and easy. And
I think that's
that
right.
people who've never played like actually think they could do it.
It was with like true confidence that I don't really have in any other area of my life that I brought to, Hall of Famer Andy Roddick, and was like, I just know in my bones that I could do this. And he was like,
I would love to see you play tennis though.
Yeah. No, you could give me a few lessons, and
okay.
The whole team really could use a few lessons. So.
All right. We'll set that up one time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, but on that note, though, of making it look so easy, I mean, like you started when you were, how old?
I was 5. No, 5.
I said 12. 5.
Yeah, I was 5.
Wow.
Maybe a little bit younger even, yeah.
And did you ask to start tennis lessons? Did your parents put you in them just because?
No. I started, like I said earlier, my dad was a soccer player, and I guess the wives were not always allowed to go on their games or trips, but there was this one trip where my mom was actually allowed to go to the games and travel with my dad, and my sister and I, we went over to hang out with my aunt and uncle, and we have 2 cousins, and they play tennis. They're a little bit older than me, and they play tennis, and I would go and like watch their game, and in the beginning of the lesson I would stand on the just on the outside of the fence, and then after a while I would like start picking up the balls, and that tennis coach asked me at the end like, hey, did you want to hit some balls? And I was like, yeah. So started hitting, and I even love like just picking up the balls and playing around like on the court, and then yeah, a few days later, my parents came home, and I was like, Mom and Dad, like, I want to play tennis. And I never stopped. Like, they signed me up, and that's basically it. Like, fell in love with it, and yeah, never stopped.
And what was that process in Belgium? What was the process in getting into the federation or schooling there?
So at that stage, we don't have, like you do here in America, like, we don't have sports in schools. Mm-hmm. You have your normal what do you call it, like physical education, like your hour a day or whatever it is, but everything is connected to like after school programs, so clubs, tennis clubs, soccer clubs, whatever it is, basketball, it's all after school. So my mom, when we got a little bit older, 4:00, my mom would be at the school. My tennis outfit would be on the back seat. She would have a little lunchbox ready so that I would eat. She would drive us to tennis, and that's where we would have like a group tennis lesson or an hour private session, and yeah, and that's basically how it was for years. And then you would have your tournaments during certain weeks of the year, in the summer. And then as you get good enough and you get to play some international tournaments, and that's where Justine Henin, like my fellow countrywoman, who is a Hall of Famer, a former #1 Grand Slam champion, we competed against each other many times growing up. And then we got to, play under 14s together, which is where I think I met Andy the first time, and then went on to playing juniors, and yeah, did well, and got lucky in a couple of draws on the women's side, qualified, and got my ranking high enough. And that's kind of how you roll into, getting on the tour, and you have to obviously compete hard and be good enough to be able to do it. But it went pretty quickly. I think I was only 15 years old when I played my first WTA tournament.
Jeez. Yeah. Do you remember which tournament was it?
It was a tournament. That's where I say I was lucky, because we had Sabine Appelmans, who was a Belgian top 20 player, and her and her husband organized a women's tournament. So me being a good junior at that time, I was able to get a wild card, and I actually lost in qualies, but I got picked up as a lucky loser, and then became and I got to the quarterfinals, and then that gives you some points. And then I got a couple more wildcards playing in the small event in Belgium, and that gave me enough points to go to I think the US Open, Wimbledon qualies in '99 was my first US Open qualies was my first Grand Slam qualifying matches. And that was the year when Serena won her first US Open. So I qualified and played Serena in the second round, and I lost to her. I was up 5-2 in the third. And when you say, like, people talk about choking, like what that feels like, I completely choked. Like 5-2 up in the third. It was Louis Armstrong Stadium, so not the big stadium, but the one next door. And like more and more people started showing up. Like all of a sudden, I'm playing in this packed stadium where people are standing at the top. Like, and I never even it all started like entering my head. And then at 5-2 in the third, she was serving, and I think 10-15 minutes later, I'm in the locker room. I lost 7-5.
You just blacked out. You're like
blacked out. My arm. I mean, she stepped it up like she could. We've seen her do so many times, like ace after ace. Then it was like I hit a double fold on my service game. Like I hit, like she would hit a winner off my serve. Like so, but it went so quickly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I choked. Like she stepped up, but I choked. Like my arm felt so heavy. Like my racket all of a sudden felt so much heavier.
At 15, I couldn't even look boys in the eyes at 15. Like to be on a huge stage saying that you choked.
Yeah, I just turned 16 just before that. So that was already a year after I played those tournaments in Belgium and stuff. But yeah, it's crazy. Like it was, you roll into a world where you're seeing your heroes, right? Monica Seles, all of a sudden, like I see her in the locker room, Steffi Graf, Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, Jim Courier, like those were all the players that we, used to, watch at home and pretend that we could be like on the driveway. My sister and I, we used to take my mom's like kitchen chairs and we would put them in the middle of the driveway and pretend that we were them. And then all of a sudden you're there and it goes so quickly. And, but it's super exciting at the same time. Like you can't get enough of, playing and competing and testing yourself against these players.
Yeah. And then what was the process after that? How did it kind of spiral from there after that first US Open match?
Yeah. And then you start to get some, you build up your points and then you have all of a sudden, like I realize now how important it was to have like a really good team around me of people who help with scheduling, right? Like there's a lot, you see it like with a lot of young players, people like to add, like they're doing well and start adding a lot more tournaments. And the WTA back then actually had a rule in place, and I still think they do, a rule in place where to help players from not being burned out at a young age, to add a limit to the amount of professional tournaments that they could play. So we were still at that time, scheduling some junior events to, at the same time, you could also do some women's events. So it was just trying to find that balance. And I feel very lucky that from a very young age, I had, a good team around me of people that knew exactly, okay, 3 to 4 tournaments in a row max. And then you're going to take a little bit break, and then you're going to add like a training period so you can still develop and work on the fundamentals. And whereas now, like you see so many players just like play week after week, whether it's for prize money or for sponsors or for just, because that's what they're used to, right? Like they don't change much. And I know now very well, like how important that was to have that mindset of like, okay, I'm not going to play too much. Like I'm going to make sure that I have my weeks off even during the season. And which is not always easy, but because sometimes you're playing well and you want to keep going and you don't want to break the momentum. And but yeah, it was really important for me, and also mentally to just stay hungry and to go home and kind of refresh and be a daughter and a granddaughter, and go see like my family and not get too caught up with all the craziness of being on tour.
I know we have a lot of parents and that are listeners that may be in a similar position, kind of trying to figure out how to navigate excuse me, things like that with their kids and trying to figure out how to build a team or what tournaments to put them in. And I think it can be really overwhelming. How did you structure your team at the time?
I mean, I was so young, so I really didn't have an influence on that. I think my dad and my mom being so into sports in their own lives. Like my mom was a gymnast, my dad, was a professional soccer player. So he knew like how important it was, like how important development was. And like what I see here in the States, like compared to home, is where in the States, there's like a lot of people like play with a lot of different coaches, especially at a young age. Like, oh, we'll do a lesson here and then we'll go an hour here and we'll try some different things. And, I feel like at a young age, it's so important to, and it doesn't always have to be the most expensive coach. It doesn't always have to be the best coach on paper or whatever, but like find the one like that's really passionate about the sport and like who's very, who's a good teacher almost, right? And who, like that voice that you hear, like I still to this day, when I play tennis, hear my coach Carl, who was like one of my, like towards my, like when I turned 10, 11, probably, he was the coach that, his words and his, like the hearing something over and over again, like that's how I talk to myself when I'm on court and still to this day, right? When I'm hitting here locally in an indoor facility where there's nobody watching, like that's the voice that's how I speak to myself. And so it's so important at a young age to find the right people who are passionate about tennis, who dedicate like their time and really help teach the kids to have a great time, like have fun playing, but also be a good coach and a mentor out there. And that's not easy to find. So I realized that's, that was a big, big factor for my success early on already, is having the right guidance.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm so interested in the behind the scenes of building a team. And I feel like it's so important, and you hear people say it, it's so important to travel with people that know you, that believe in you, that you can trust. As you started touring more, how did you sort of structure your team, and who did you feel like it was so important to have with you? And like, how did that change even after you had Jada? Did your team get bigger, smaller?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it changed over time. When I was younger and I started doing well and I was able to, make some more money. And like for me, it was really important to have a little bit of normal life kind of on the road as well. So my childhood friend from growing up, Caroline, who was also a tennis player, we went to the Belgian Federation together, went to boarding school together. She played, I think her highest ranking was like 150, 140 or so. So like she would come to some events when it would work, just so that I could have some normal life with me, so that I could go out to the movies and have a dinner where you didn't have to talk, like it would not just always be just your coach. And so my dad would travel with me a lot as well. And then you have your coaching staff, and that grew over time. In the beginning it was just your coach, and the WTA really has a very well organized kind of physical therapy department where you could use great resources on the grounds of each tournament to use their trainers. But then for convenience wise, it was just it was great. When I started having a bigger contract, I could kind of reinvest that money that I made to reinvest that into my career, and then hire my personal private my private fitness coach or my private physio, and have the convenience of saying, okay, like I'm done at 1:00, like I've practiced 2 hours, I did my fitness workout, and now I'm going to go home and have my massage in my room or my treatment without having to wait for like a certain opening, that might be at 6:00 at night, and wait around at the courts. And so it just became a convenience thing to have, my own team, or kind of expand my own team. And then, when we had Jada, we had a nanny that traveled with us, and just to make things a little bit easier as well. And so that I didn't have to kind of stress about, like, is she able to go to bed on time, or did she have dinner? And so that would not always fall on me. But that was at times a struggle, because, as a first-time mom, you do feel guilty too, right? Like you feel like, oh, like I should be there, like, I should be the one putting her in bed. And like you have those thoughts too. I mean, now I have 3 and I'm like, all right, bye guys, I gotta go. See ya.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How did that, once you had Jada and once you were sort of grappling with that, if I feel this guilt of not being there, but also I have this passion for this thing, how did the pressure change? Did the pressure get a little bit heavier? Did it get a little bit lighter because you had Jada as your obvious number one priority?
I mean, I think in general, I think my you just become a little bit more mature. You grow up. Like I also lost, like during the time where I had my daughter, I also lost my dad. Like he battled cancer for like a good year, and just like that whole process, like it has an effect on how you look at things. And my husband and I, we got married, so I was happy like at home in my private life, and but also experienced like some traumatic kind of events with my dad passing away. And so, but it does change you, right? Like as a person, when you go back onto tour and you look at like the lifestyle, and you're able to kind of take a step back from it and look at the craziness as it is, and not get like kind of absorbed by it all. And I had to laugh actually when I listened to Madison and her husband on the podcast last week, just to hear them talk about like how he he didn't find it important that Madison would practice like the day before the games. Like I won my US Open in 2009, and I didn't practice like on my days off. Like I didn't even go to the courts. So my fitness coach and I, we would just go to Central Park, and we do some sprints, and I would take my rubber bands and do some, and we'd do footwork drills, and I would like take my racket and I would do some like service motions or whatever. And that was it. Like I was hitting the ball well, like I didn't need to like practice more. And so it was like funny to hear her say that, or to see, I think it was her husband who said it. And it was, it just brought back a lot of memories of, just to follow your gut instinct, right? Like it's so abnormal to do that because everybody feels like they need to practice every day. But at times it also mentally so draining to be out there and and I think Madison and I were pretty similar. It absorbs a lot it takes a lot from you to always, to be out there and to feel that kind of buzzing energy. And so it was nice to kind of step away from it and just stay in the hotel and go to Central Park and spend time with Jada and Brian. And that was it. Like that was a very relaxing kind of day before my next big match.
I mean, it's so great. There are so many parallels between you and Madison, is that I even noticed in that episode, if you guys haven't watched that episode with her and Bjorn, that episode
it was so good.
So good.
I usually listen to the new podcast that comes out, like when I'm walking my dog. And I had tears like running over my face, like as I'm like listening to it, and I'm walking around the lake here a little bit further. And it was so good. And Bjorn is amazing. And the impact that, he's been able to have in a very, like an intense way, but then also very natural, like the way that he brings his message across and his feelings, basically. Like I remember like hearing, like he would always say, I felt like this, I felt like that, right? Like I love hearing that, because there's so many coaches out there now that like say, like, oh, I have to do this, I have to act a certain way, I have to behave like this. Like you don't hear that much anymore, where coaches are like, I felt like that was, and that really came across well. Like I feel like he really was able to kind of bring the message across, and it was absorbed so well by Madison, and it gave her confidence and a calmness in stressful moments that we've seen her kind of at times maybe not be so calm and in control. Loved seeing her win it, and loved listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I think with him having not coached at that level or coached at all, he probably did have some sort of doubt of like, am I really the person for this job? And so there was a lot of like, well, I just sort of felt like this, and so we gave this a shot. And then he just knows Madison so well, obviously, and all of that just translated into like such a beautiful relationship.
I loved hearing too, like how they never really spoke about tennis much. Like it was about probably the stressors of the emotions, right? Like, oh, it's frustrating, and I got to go away for 3 months to Europe or to whatever it is, like that kind of stuff, but never tactics, technique. Like he just stayed away from that. And so it was really nice to hear how that kind of collaboration grew very naturally. Like I loved hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And having someone know you that well, like it just goes to show how important that is. And
but it can also go wrong very quickly too, right? Like you have to be, both mature and understanding, and like be able to communicate very well whenever there's like a frustration. You know what I mean? Like it can grow like wrong so quickly too.
And bleed into other areas of your life.
And then it becomes a frustration and a wonder, like, oh, why did we do this? Like I've, been around players who have their boyfriends coach them, and it becomes very messy at times. So it's great that it worked out, and we could all hear how great he was in that podcast too, and to get like some insight about how he handled things with her, not just during the Australian Open, but probably the year leading up to that moment of winning a slam, like the time that goes into it, and the process is it just doesn't happen overnight. Like it's many, many, many months and practices and years of hard work and failing at times and coming back and pushing through, and it takes a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think sort of like you said, it's so easy to grind and grind and grind and grind, and you forget to be like, you know what, actually maybe the best thing for me right now would be to rest for a day, or to get to spend some time with my daughter and get that mental refresh. Like I think if you're starting at 5 and you're just going and going and going and going, it can be easy to be like, you know what, I don't need to take a break. I'm used to this. This is my life. And then, you take a break and things start to get even better.
Yeah. And it's all about finding that right balance, right? Because we've all felt, or had days where we didn't feel like going to practice, but then at the end, when you come home, you're like, oh, I'm glad I went, right? Like, and that's the same with like, it's how you're feeling. Like a lot of times, and I'm not saying everything, there's a lot more talked about mental health, right? But I feel like when we were younger, like we didn't talk about it because we didn't want to show weakness, but also we experienced so many times, like I experienced so many times, like where I felt tired or didn't feel like going to practice, but then like actually went to practice and like overcame those like kind of negative thoughts and went home, and I was like, oh, like I'm really proud of myself. Like I didn't feel like going, and if I said no, then I would not have experienced, being able to fight through it, and the discipline and I feel like I take that with me in my day-to-day life now. Like I don't feel like doing the laundry or whatever, like, making the bed, whatever it is. Like I don't always want to do that, but you learn to like at times not give in to those kind of thoughts of like, oh, it would be nice to be able to go have a drink with my girlfriends and like, or whatever you want to do, but you need to have a certain discipline. And I feel like in tennis, it's so important, to have that right balance between pushing yourself and learning and becoming better, but then also to be able to rest enough so that you're mentally not overstimulated or so that it becomes a negative thing. So it's finding that right balance and being very open and honest with your team and communicate very well was definitely something that you have to be open, or you have to do to your team, but also to yourself. Like you really have to tell yourself, like, be very open and honest, even if it is negative or bad or sometimes hard to say those things. But and
I know, I mean, that balance obviously looks different for every player, male or female. And I know Madison talked about it a good bit in her episode, how she had started therapy and how much of a huge difference that had made in her life. And then you talked about sort of the services that the WTA and ATP offer on tour for players. Does any of that include mental health services that you know of?
Yeah. I know the WTA for many, many years already has had people on tour travel full time to be available for the players. But then it's also weird, like in our sport, because it's such an individual sport, and every player has their own team, that it's sometimes weird to go to kind of a neutral person who works for a lot of players. Right? Like there's like a trust factor too, that, I know she's not going to tell other players, but there's still an issue, right? Like, I don't know. It's like, it feels like a little bit more protected when it's someone in your home country or, from your own team, and that they're more there exclusively for you. But again, not everybody can afford that, right? Like it's a great tool to have. And, but I feel like the women's tour has not saying that the ATP hasn't done that, but the women's tour has always been very proactive in having, great people in the physio room. I remember after I had Jada, like just to have, physios qualified to train your pelvic floor muscles, and like I mean, I had to do that, like, still, like, I still need to do that. Like, it was so important to have that on tour and to have women who've had kids and to be able to share experiences. And, they become your friends. Like, they become your, co-mothers who you share your experiences with, and your doubts and your frustrations. And, if Jada was sick on tour, like, okay, like I could call them and they, were able to help me find a doctor, or like, it was so many things that you don't think about, but it was at times it's like a crazy environment to grow up in, but at the same time also like a beautiful environment, because you were able to really connect with women from all around the world who work for the tour and who are there to help you become, a better athlete and be healthy and physically and emotionally. Yeah. And kind of take things away from you, like make things a little bit easier for you when you were struggling. So that was, and I don't think enough players kind of realize that when you're in it. It's basically kind of when you're retired that you realize like how unique that whole situation is to grow up in, and because it's so, I wouldn't change it for the world, but it's not like a normal upbringing or a normal life, right?
Yeah, and it is like the true definition of it takes a village. Do you like for all of the people that excuse me, put these tours on, all of the staff at these events, trainers, physios, do you feel like you were surrounded a good bit by women? Or a lot of those people women? Or is it kind of like a mostly...
No, so on the women's tour, it was like the physios, because they sit in the locker room, right? So you walk in there with just a towel or whatever. Like it's mostly just women. The massage therapists that they find too were all very highly qualified. Kathleen Stroya, she's the head of the whole physical kind of medical department on the women's tour. She's incredibly smart, but also doesn't matter where in the world that we would play, whether it was in Asia or in Australia or in South America or wherever we would play, in Europe, in America, like she, we always had full-time physios from the WTA traveling.
That's so great.
Yeah. And sometimes it was one or two, but then they would find really good locals to work with, or local massage therapists that the WTA trainers would kind of teach, and they would be around it. And so, it's it takes a lot of work and a lot of people to kind of bring it to where it is now. And I think that's something that is, super important.
No, that's so important. And I wouldn't have thought that. I think I have maybe not, obviously I just don't know anything, but I wouldn't have thought that on the WTA tour that, they would have considered having women trainers and physios. And of course, all of that makes sense. It's just something I'd never considered.
Right. But then you could go to the doctor, the tournament doctor, which would, could be a guy, right? Like there's whatever, but it's basically also because a lot of our training rooms are in the locker room, right? The massage tables, the physio tables. So it's just, that's what I look forward to now. Like when I go back to tournaments, like, of course I know a few players, but it's the staff, right? Of women that have, like that I, met when I was, 16 years old, and that would help me, adjust and teach me certain things and give me guidance on tour and to see a lot of them that are still involved, right? Like
that's amazing. And it speaks well of the tour, that they still have those same people there. Like that's a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Talk about the women's locker room. Say whatever you, but are there women in there? Are we complaining about our periods? Are we exchanging tampons? Are we talking about cute players? What are we, what's going on in the locker room?
Probably all the above. Depends on who's kind of in your corner. The crazy thing is so we do share our locker room with, with your opponents, like your opponent on the day, or with your opponent that you could meet up in the quarters, semifinals, or finals, right? So there is that kind of, it's not I mean, you do feel that a little bit, right? Like when you have especially on the days of a semifinal or a big game and your opponent walks in and like you do you stick to yourself, but you try not to get distracted but I mean, with your friends and, now, some players have some music playing. I mean, we talk about everything from, obviously tennis to what's on the TVs to, personal things in life, right? Periods. Yeah. Like, what do you do? Um, yeah, I mean, everything, just like women, when you go have a coffee, like that's how we would sit in the locker room. And sometimes we would be stretching or we would, you know, yeah, but we all have our own schedules. So like there would be players who I wouldn't see a whole week just because our schedules are so different until maybe the semifinals, or I'd be like, oh, I haven't seen you here. Like it was, so our schedules are so different. A lot of players don't even spend a lot of time in the locker room either. It's basically just to kind of change a shirt before the press conference, and basically that's it. Or to leave their bags there just for storage or something. So everybody's is different. There's players who love taking naps in the locker rooms, or you can see them laying there on the floor with like a bunch of towels under their head and like kind of on top of them to keep them warm. And so it all depends. It depends.
You mentioned seeing your friends around, and the example that comes to mind for me is Paula Badosa and Arina Sabalenka and their friendship. How do you separate that? Like when they met at the Australian Open and you're thinking like they're best friends, one of them has to beat the other. Like, how do you separate those things?
I mean, it's best friends, but then I don't know. Like I see like with my closer friends, like I could never have that kind of relationship with an opponent, just because like if my friend would be on tour with me, like we would be together all the time. Like like we would meet up for dinner all the time. And so in the tennis, there's still a little bit of kind of a separation where I feel like they all have their team, their boyfriends, so there's a little bit of a separation. I do think in the last few years, like a lot of players are a lot closer than what they were back in the day. I think maybe social media has something to do with it too. Like I didn't know much about, my opponent's private lives back in the day because it just wasn't out there. Like it was, you would, the press conference, you would kind of maybe pick up some things here and there, and I would know who was part of their team, but you didn't know a lot of personal things. You didn't know where they went on vacation or who they were dating at, whatever, unless now you see it all out there on social media. And so it's different. But yeah, I think it's great. Like I think it's great for women to be close and to have that connection on tour and to vent to one another. And but then at the same time, it has to be weird to then compete against each other as well. And but there were definitely players like back in the day who you could play against, and literally like 2 minutes into the locker room, you could joke with and laugh with and talk about the match and like literally like talk about the match to each other. And then there were players who you could potentially meet in the quarterfinal and they wouldn't even look at you anymore. So everybody's so different.
Yeah.
And everybody deals with the stress and the pressure different. And so that it was just it's we're all together, but it's also very individual too.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't yet fully wrapped my head around, is like what the line between it being a team sport and being individual. And these organizations have a say in everything, but also your team only has a say in this. And like that must be really hard to navigate.
And it is. And it's also, a lot of people follow the Grand Slams, right, on TV, or the big tournaments, and there you have the big locker rooms and the big facilities, but all the other months out of the year, we're playing in, especially when I was younger, like we didn't have the big tournaments like you do now in Miami and those kind of events. And we played in very small venues, which was great. Like it was so fun and intimate. But those locker rooms were, like you couldn't have a lot of people in the locker rooms at the same time, right? So it just, it's changed so much, and it's all credit to the sport and where to see it grow, that you're able to, have amazing tennis facilities and see the sport grow, all around the world is very, very cool. But I still look back and think back about those moments where, you play a very small and you hear the people, like, you can hear what they're talking about. Like, they're literally like a racket, like away from the sideline. Like, that's how close it was at times. So that was fun. And I loved that. But yeah, the teams are definitely, it's a weird, I mean, now that I'm out of it for so long, it's a weird feeling, because the player like pays their team, right? Yeah, and especially on the women's tour, there's so many people out there that are trying, or that hop around from one player to the other, and so trusting is a very hard. Like, I can talk about like being open about your feelings and your communication, and but then knowing that this coach could literally be with your biggest rival 2 months later, is also like there's always a little bit of a restriction, and yeah. That's why I love seeing like Maddie's connection, even Sabalenka with her team, like seeing, the relationship that she has with them. And like, it's really, really cool. And you can see that she's happy and that they have fun together. And so, yeah, it's,
and the results have spoken for themselves. The results have shown it.
For sure. And once that works, you know exactly, like, Sabalenka knows exactly what she needs to do. Like, her team knows, like, to keep her relaxed and to keep her, or to read her when she's a little bit stressed. Like, how do we approach this? Like, do we start talking? Do we take a step back? Like, it's so important to, to kind of read, into the moment. And there's a lot of coaches that a lot of times want to push their kind of thoughts onto a player, and that will work for a little bit, but at the end of the day, that will just cause conflict, and the player will be burned out or unhappy, and then that's very tough to kind of handle for months at a time on tour.
So, in talking about teams and trust and women's careers, this is something that you and Andy have talked about on the show. But talk to me a little bit about Simona Halep. She just announced her retirement. How are you feeling about that?
I feel sad in a sense, right? That she the way her last few years have gone, and that she hasn't been able to she's worked very hard to try and compete again and to be healthy after being off the tennis tour for so long. And I feel bad for her. I know she's had, besides the last few years, like, she's had an amazing career, and I've been there for a lot of her wins on tour, and to see where she came from having those Grand Slam finals where she lost, to sometimes maybe losing a little bit of hope or belief that she could do it, to then be able to win her first Grand Slam, a little bit similar like Madison, but then to be able to do it and win, at the French and win at Wimbledon. I think it was an incredible achievement. She's had an incredible career, hard worker, disciplined, great girl, very humble. I hope that she, besides, being frustrated a little bit, I'm sure, that she can focus on nothing but the good stuff that's happened in her career, and take that with her. I mean, her family is awesome. Like, she worked with Darren Cahill for many years as well, and had a good team around her. And I think, the focus needs to lay on all the good stuff that she's done.
Yeah, the response, just from what I've seen, has been overwhelmingly positive, which has been really nice to see, just on socials, people highlighting like you said, the good moments of her career. So from what it looks like to me,
she's one of the most fierce competitors that we've had. But then at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, like, she could be in the locker room and talk to you normal, right? And yeah, like, that says a lot. And I mean, it's sad to see that she has to end it on a way that, where she probably would have tried to maybe have one more really good tournament or something. But I'm sure, when you've tried for so long, after a while, you're like, okay, like, I gotta, whatever it is, read the signs. I gotta just I've tried long enough now, and this is it. And you feel it very strongly when it's time to step away. And I'm excited to see. I'm sure she'll play some Legends events, or at least I hope so, so that we get to play some, whatever, Wimbledon Legends doubles matches or something. That'll be fun to have her back and actually do, like, have some dinners together and a party here and there that the Legends events put on. So, those are the nice things about when you get to retire. I didn't know that when you're retired that there's this whole kind of life afterwards on the tennis tour where you get to kind of get to know everybody even better than competing when you were competing against each other. And that's so fun now, is to be able to go back and, you know, like Martina and I last week, like we hung out and we talked and you catch up, and it's really fun to be able to do that, because there's not many like women out there, like when I go to the school gate now, like who understand the life that we've lived, or the, you know, everything that we've gone through. So to be able to share kind of those connections and those moments is it feels really nice.
Yeah, and you'll always have that, and being able to go back, like you said, like no pressure, and enjoy it for what it is. Like a fan, but so much closer, obviously, than that. Like, that's really nice.
Because we all started as like tennis fans, right? Like we loved the sport, we loved watching it on TV. So now we go back to like, okay, you competed in it for so long, and then you kind of lose a little bit of the. I'm not saying you lose it, but there's a different energy to going to a tournament. Whereas now, like, I can't wait to like, you know, watch the quarterfinals at the US Open, or a night session at the US Open, or, you know, like it's so different than it used to be. But yeah, I still love the sport and love seeing the new generations compete and seeing life changes for people, you know, like we saw with Madison winning. And like, those are the most beautiful moments, I feel like, that, you know, sports brings to somebody, and it touches so many people. And it's a great sport.
You can feel that everywhere when there's a player that everyone is rooting behind, and then they get that big win. Like, you can just feel that energy. I could feel it through a phone screen. I could feel it through a TV. Like, it just unites everyone. It's so cool. Yeah. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's it will be fun to see Madison compete in Indian Wells, like when she gets to play in her home country and or play at the US Open this year. Like, those are, like, when I spoke to her, I told her, like, listen, this is not what you do it for, but it makes you kind of relive that for her, the Australian Open win. But like, wherever she goes now, like, she will be announced as like a Grand Slam champion, like when you walk out on court, or like, you know, like, or when she goes back to Australia, like, it's like the defending champion. And it's, to a lot of people it can be overwhelming, but it's also like, I felt very honored and proud to be able to have that with me. And so I'm excited for her to experience that. And so it's fun. It's a lot of hard work and discipline, but when you get to have those kind of moments, and it makes it all worthwhile.
Kim, I could keep going. I'm honestly an endless well of dumb tennis questions. So thank you so much for coming on to answer them. I know the fans had a ton as well. Maybe we do this again sometime.
Yeah, I would love to.
I think I don't know that producer Mike would love if we put this all into one episode. But thank you so much. Hopefully we are able to do it again. Let us know in the comments what you guys think. Drop a like, a follow, a subscribe. Follow us on socials. I will be there. I live there. And so, thank you guys so much for this. Kim, thank you. I can't thank you enough.
No, you're welcome. I can't wait for the next one.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go to break. This has been Served without Andy Roddick.